what it's worth. And unusually, because I am often presenting with slides, but I just really wanted to generally talk, because I'm coming up to my 100 days actually in Co-ops UK, and I've been really reflecting on what it means to be a cooperative, and particularly in times of social and economic crisis. And if I was doing a PowerPoint right now, my slide would say that do you know that co-ops are 76% resilience after 5 years, and that's compared to 45% in a traditional sort of non-wider social enterprise business. But cooperatives in particular have got a really, really strong resilience rate in economic and social hardship. And this again is bearing out at the moment. We're in the middle of our co-op economy report, which comes out in May, and that is where we survey all the co-ops, and we talk to people about what their finances are like, what their resources are like, what their products and services and generally how they're trading. And obviously we'll be releasing all that information in May, but the figures that are coming in and the conversations that we're having are demonstrating really that absolutely that resilience has proven to be true. So just to give you a couple of examples, I'm going to use like the economic and the resilience examples of in the pandemic about why, like I say, on reflection, I believe co-ops are so resilient. And the first example I'm going to use, I'm not going to say who the company is, because they are a digital co-op, and they're a worker co-op, like I know many of you are here. And when recently I was having a conversation with one of the gentleman that founded the co-op, and I was talking about the response to the pandemic, particularly regards to the workers and how does it work, because I've never worked in a worker co-op, and I do find it absolutely fascinating. So he was talking about the way they came to their decisions through the pandemic, and he just said, well, we just let everybody decide. So some people went on furlough, some didn't, some went full-time, some went part-time. It was just generally fine. And they didn't have, so at Cooperatives UK, we had, quite a formal process, because we're not a worker co-op, although we do have a management team that tries to work on an equal basis. But we were talking to our staff and finding out what everyone wanted to do, and then we came up with a policy, and then there was a process, and obviously this was all before I was here, and that was how it was established. It was really interesting to see in the worker co-op, digital co-op, their response was, do whatever's right for you right now. And I was going, yeah, but like, well, some people, because actually in the social enterprise that I founded, SharpFutures, which is a creative, digital and tech social enterprise, when we kind of looked at what the opportunity was around furlough, we ended up, because we lost loads of our work, not the digital but the events-based stuff, and we ended up furloughing a good sort of 90% of the staff in that first lockdown before it could become part-time. And what actually happened was that myself and actually the finance director, we were absolutely worn out at the end of the period, because we'd had to pick up everyone else's kind of work as well that needed kicking along. And I saw these tensions in that first lockdown about people that were furloughed and people that weren't, and people's responses. And it was great to see, like I say, this particular digital co-op's response really interesting. And that was very much to do with the principles of being a cooperative. That was why they made this response. True to say that through, their turnover has actually gone up through this period, and they're all really genuinely happy with the response they've had in the pandemic. The other example I'm going to use is the Edinburgh Bicycle Co-op, because they actually turned very specifically to their values, and again in this first lockdown, and really thought about, well, look, how can we show solidarity, how can we be there for everybody else? So they thought about it and thought, right, okay, well, we're going to offer free puncture repair to all the key workers, and straight away that was their response. So they stayed open in the shop, and they were offering free puncture repair. Well, of course, what that resulted in was the fact that ultimately they did better business. They did better business because, you know, not only did they have, you know, happy customers, they got new customers. So again, like those two kind.
Rose, I think you're on mute.
Yeah, sorry, the host muted me. I'm not sure. So yeah, sorry. So I was just saying that basically there's very two extremely different responses. Both came out of cooperative values and principles, both very different responses. Both demonstrated an economic resilience. And this is the key thing I've got to say, really. It's because of the uniqueness, I believe, of cooperatives is the reason that it's important in these times of crisis, because you're able to respond in a way that your cooperative was created. And I've been really looking at this, like, what is a co-op? You know, let's say I came from a much wider social enterprise background, you know, a lot more around kind of, you know, let's say the kick model. And so when I was invited to take up this, and obviously worked with co-ops and lots of co-ops in my life, but, you know, I'd never, like I said, never, you know, been part of a worker co-op. So when I was kind of getting into, but what is a co-op? How do I make it meaningful? Because a big part of my job is to raise the awareness of cooperatives. And you know, we've made it really quite easy for people to not engage with us with quite a lot of complexities or the language that we use. And I kept saying, no, but what is a co-op? What is a co-op? Just give it me. And what don't, you know? And like I was driving the team at Co-ops UK mad. They're like, don't you know what a co-op is? Yeah, we've just appointed her. I'm like, no, but what is a co-op? You know, give it me in some kind of simple stuff. So you start going, right, well, look at it. And I was looking with the retailers. I'm going, right, all retail co-ops. Right, okay, so it's really highly likely that, you know, you'll have a better carbon footprint, but you can't say it's definite, or it's probably right that, you know, so for example, Co-op Group in the pandemic improved their wages for all the key workers. So, you know, all retail co-ops have got, you know, key workers on real living wage. Well, they haven't, and you're trying to pull apart all these different elements. And what I ultimately come down to is that, you know, the things that are in common with all co-ops are this distribution of power and distribution of wealth. And actually, although it's one of the absolute strengths of the movement, we don't communicate that very well, but this distribution of power means that we make decisions in social, economic and political challenges, and we distribute our wealth as well, really. That makes an impact, that makes a social impact, that makes an economic impact. But what we don't do well as a movement is eloquently explain a lot of that social impact in particular. But it is the reason that it's important, because let's say if you go into the detail of what's been happening, you know, throughout the pandemic, you can point to examples of, you know, co-ops like Open Food Network that have been growing because they needed, or, you know, co-ops that kind of changed what their offering was to respond to the pandemic. Ultimately, this key component that we distribute power means that decision making, people in the co-op make the decisions together about how to respond, and the distribution of wealth has a social impact. But we're not great as a sector at being able to explain that social impact, and I think it's something that we need to work hard on. So then when you say, well, why is it important politically? Because, you know, the cooperative movement does have you know, a quite well known political history, and, you know, not least I am a Mancunian, in case you haven't recognised that yet. And, you know, we have you know, a lot of social reform kind of came out of not just this period, but, you know, from Greater Manchester. So if you look at trade unions and suffragettes, and you kind of go, you know, what is it about, you know, being you know, what is it about sort of the Mancunian spirit? Because I'm pointing now in the pandemic to you know, there was a real challenge, wasn't there, from Greater Manchester in particular to the government to say this isn't fair, you know, and there was a lot of challenge around, you know, the fact that, you know, Greater Manchester was in lockdown and you know, other areas weren't, but there wasn't that economic support. And again, it really shone itself to be a political kind of, you know, fairly socialist and angry response, and you go, why is it, why is it people, from my area, are so important in this social reform, or have been in the past? And a lot of that, you think, is it in the water, or is it just because the country does need levelling up and there's more to be angry about? But it's really important, let's say when Andy Burnham rose up against the sort of lack of level playing field that presented itself geographically in the pandemic, you go, gosh, interesting, he's a Labour and cooperative mayor. So these political roots that we also have in the cooperative movement. And that's not to take away, if you're in America, they'll look at it in a very Republican way. I've been working with the government all this week to come up with a plan to again put cooperatives into opportunities for people that are looking for work. So it's not that you can't kind of be cross-party in the way that you work, but this deep rooted sense of just distribution of power, and what that means is that you are able to take control, and even if it's only a small way, even if it's the sports club that you're part of, or the shop at the end of the street, is something very, very important for people's mental health, for people's belief in the future, for people's belief in opportunity, that you can take hold and make some decisions, is a really, really strong reason to join a co-op, be part of a co-op, start a co-op. So hopefully, in a quick potted response, the social, economic and political times, hard times, that's why cooperatives are important. We've just launched, actually, obviously can talk later about the plans for Cooperatives UK going forward, and how I really need all your support actually to help us amplify and get this. People, the man and woman in the street don't know what a cooperative is in the way that they know what fair trade is, or other movements. So we've really got to get this message out there. It's really important to build back better, because when you look at pandemics over the time, they do happen a lot, every 100 years, they're new to us, but they do happen. And when you look at what happens after a pandemic, the truth is everybody thinks they're going to change the world after it. So my plea to you guys is that we be the generation that actually does that effectively. So one thing you can help me with is share the fact that Cooperatives UK has just announced with the Cooperative Bank the Unfound Accelerator programme, and this is about getting people to think about putting their ideas to use in a cooperative platform way. So we just talked about Open Food Co-op there as an example. There's some really exciting stuff going on, like Equal Care Co-op, but it'd be really interesting to try and find people that who are those digital pioneers now. Where's our technological toad lane? Because we're facing now what started the movement, upheaval in economics, social, political upheaval at the cusp of a beginning of a revolution, and our time to be able to seize that will be a small window. And I really do hope that we do seize that, because I think that we grew out of unrest, and we're in a period of unrest. So I think we're incredibly important. We'll offer people hope, we'll offer people a fair and equitable future, and that's why cooperatives are important. And hopefully, Polly, I've done that within your time frame. Thank you.
Amazing. You've got 1 minute to go.
There you go.
That's fantastic. Thank you so much, Rose. And welcome to your post. It's exciting to have like a new CEO. I'm going to take a couple of questions which have popped up in the chat first of all. So one from Animorph, who I'm sure won't mind me reading it out for time's sake, which is, what is the core focus of Co-ops UK in supporting innovation in existing co-ops and making new ones?
So that's a really great question, and let's say that an immediate response in the new ones is absolutely that Unfound Accelerator. In terms of the innovation going forward with the development, I think we've probably got Vika from Cooperatives UK on here, because we're just building up a bank. Actually, we've been emailing about it today, of kind of where are those innovations, where are those best practices, how do we share those? So I think that, let's say, in the startup and in the kind of small growth co-ops, because we also have the Hive that pushes around innovation as well. We've got some products and opportunities, but I know we've not met yet, Annie Morph. I know you're on my next surgery, and that's a kind of question really, because for me, we need to be for example, it concerns me that there are no cooperatives on the government's artificial intelligence panel. So if you're talking about innovation, you know, my vision for Cooperatives UK is that we are helping to form innovation in policy and legislation as much as we are in terms of working together on new innovations in you know, the proliferation of 5G. The fact that people are going to be able to, you know, log in from anywhere across the world and access whole, you know, open source, you know, cognitive improvements, you know, the space travel that will have just advanced our, you know, Earth technology. We are on the cusp of a technological revolution. So it's going to be very much in the heart of the Cooperatives UK strategy to be part of that innovation. But like I say, not just in terms of what the cooperatives themselves are doing, but the way that the UK in particular responds to that in policy and ethics. Hope that answers your question.
Sorry, thank you, Rose. Well, actually, I should give Anna Morph the opportunity to say if that's answered the question.
Thank you.
I can hear them next door. Okay, and then I'll just take the next question, which was from, sorry, Oliver. Would you like to ask your own question? Or would you like me to do it for you?
Yeah, sure. So I have a 3-year-old who's going to jump around the bed, so maybe you should ask it. But I'll try. I guess my question was around. Actually, maybe you should ask it. Maybe you should ask it.
I never know where I don't want to interrupt too much. Anyway, so the question is, how much should the co-op movement embrace the localism agenda, e.g. by focusing on community ownership and community shares?
Yeah, again, you know, I can't take credit for this. This has been in long play at Cooperatives UK before I arrived in development, you know, empowering places. We're about to announce a major city region for the ownership hub. We're working closely with the government on the announcement in the budget about the community ownership fund. And actually, when I was saying, I was doing that musing around like what do co-ops do? And a lot of co-ops, like I say, you can't categorically say this is a unifying factor, but a lot of co-ops, including our biggest co-op, you know, group, you know, will make an absolute impact in their area. So if you look at places like Preston and Wigan, in terms of how that local agenda is really making an impact and retaining the money in the area and developing, you know, the economic wealth building. So let's say Cooperatives UK has been doing a lot of this already, and there's a whole bunch of announcements coming over the next few months around it. I think it's really, really important, and it's something that we will be absolutely encouraging. I know Central England Co-op are working on the 15-minute kind of, I've forgotten what they call it, but this idea that, you know, the more synergy you create in an area, the greater the outcome. And again, you know, the pandemic's really shown that. I mean, you know, who's met neighbours they didn't know they had, you know, who's met, well, I'm sure they know they had them, but they'd never had a conversation with them previously. So people meeting the neighbours for the first time, people being able to, you know, go into green spaces that they've discovered in lockdown. You know, localism has become really important. And, you know, the on-demand economy is really going to add to that as well, because it means that people are expecting your milk to be able to be delivered to you in 10 minutes. It can't come from the big massive supermarket that's 20 miles away. It will be coming from your co-op, possibly by a drone. That's what. So yeah, so all of this, how do we retain that money in our local area and grow that? So yeah, it's a really important part of the Cooperatives UK vision for the movement in the 21st century.
Thank you, Rose. I'm looking forward to getting my milk delivered by drone. That sounds exciting. Right, okay. Next up, we've got Daniel. And Daniel is, let me just check this, is Project Development Manager at the Co-operative College. I hope I've got your job title correct. So yeah, Daniel, take it away.
Thank you for that. Thank you, Rose. That was brilliant.
Thanks, Rose.
To hear, and thank you, Polly, for inviting me to the event today. I've been looking forward to it and having an opportunity to speak to a captive audience that can't escape me and my radicalism. So I'm going to share a presentation I've put together. It's mainly just to stop me from rambling. So forgive the lack of Naz on it. But as Polly said, I am the project development manager for the Cooperative College. For those of you that don't know us, we were in the city centre. We're now working remotely thanks to COVID. But I've been doing a lot of work to develop our UK youth and community projects. So I'm going to speak today a lot about young people and a lot about the potential of the cooperatives and also about what we're not getting right as well, because I think there's a lot of that. The title of today's session is In Crisis. So this is the second event that I've spoken at to do with cooperatives in crisis. And what I said at the last one is it's quite funny because every job I've had where I've been with young people has been in a state of crisis, whether that was teaching, whether that was working in residential care homes, whether that was working in alternative provision with people in PRUs. There's always been this sense of crisis and panic and things going wrong, catastrophe that we need to address. So it's been interesting for me, and I'll talk to you about my journey at the college. So my first slide is provocatively titled, Young People Do Not Care About Cooperatives, Why Should They? So this is something that has come up time and time again when I've had discussions with my team at the college, when I've had discussions with other people in marketing and comms departments. There's an issue in that we're not known. Rose alluded to it before. People don't know. People in the street don't know what a co-op is, or they know the co-op group, and that's it. And I think if we want young people to care about cooperatives, there's a lot of work that we have to do. And I would turn that spotlight back on us as cooperatives, as professionals and adults working within the sector. Is that we have a lot of work to do in terms of change and transition. It's no secret that cooperatives are incredibly white, cooperatives are incredibly middle class, and we're not attracting young people, be they young people of colour, be they young people from working class roots. We're not connecting with the people that are going to benefit the most, in my opinion, from what cooperatives have to offer. So in times of crisis, as Rhoda has already touched on, cooperatives are fantastic. They're a great emergency way to mobilise people, bring them together, have quality, meaningful communications and affect change. But are we seeing that? And this is something that I'm going to ask you all here today, is that do you feel like the cooperative movement has responded to these crises in the right way? We've had a crisis of austerity for decades. Has the cooperative movement mobilised and addressed that? The crisis of homelessness linked to that in the city centre. Every time I travel into work, I have to walk past these people. Are we doing enough in that respect? Last year, we saw the Black Lives Matter movement raise the racial profile on a global scale. And again, yeah, there was lots of talk, there was lots of things discussed, there was lots of meetings. But in terms of actual action, I would ask us all, are we doing enough? And so the same relates to the young people that I work with. In order for me to engage them with the cooperative movement, I need to engage with them as young people first. And so obviously you all know about building trust, building relationships, and creating a relationship from which then you can then educate, you can begin this process of learning and mutual growth. But before we get to that point, we have to lead by example. Are we ready to include a whole generation of young people into the movement that has no place for them currently? We have, many projects doing amazing things. I don't want to speak ill of cooperatives as a whole, of course not. Across the nation, there's cooperatives doing great things. There's cooperatives doing, fantastic work to help people, but it's not known about. People don't know about it. They don't talk about it enough. For me, the cooperative difference is all about people, and that's the strength of the movement. It's about the people within it and what we do together and how we communicate and how we collaborate. And so there's not enough of that collaboration happening. And it's no secret within the movement that, one of our key principles is falling by the wayside. This cooperation amongst cooperatives is something that I've not seen enough of since I've joined the movement. I'm asking the questions, a lot of people are coming back to me with the same answers, which is, we don't know. We don't know why there's not more communal spaces in this building where there's 10 co-ops. We don't know why there's not more conversations about what we can do together in this time of crisis. People are willing to have the conversations. We've got a whole network of people that are here for the right reasons, but for whatever reason, we're not coming together. And for me, we're not quite leading by example to the extent that we should, if we want to engage these young people. Now, those are some of the problems. Here's some of my proposed solutions. I think there's a big issue around representation, inspiration, and communication when it comes to cooperatives. The language that we use is often very formal, it's often very pedagogical or ideological, and it very rarely speaks to the young person themselves. So we have a massive issue with language and communication that we need to address if we want to entice and intrigue and inspire young people to come and join us on our mission, whatever that be. And I think that's something that we can definitely do better on. When we talk about, you know, Rose spoke about resilience, and cooperatives are resilient, and that's something that I'm going to speak to. I decided to move away from giving loads of examples and different case studies. I've got a couple of links that I'm going to pop in the chat when I finish sharing, because trying to do it now will no doubt crash my PowerPoint and cause loads of problems. But, you know, there's the Abyssindi cooperative that was founded in Moss Side in the late 70s, early 80s, that addressed, you know, the need for representation for Black women in the area. That was a fantastic response to a crisis, a racial crisis, a poverty crisis. It was there, but it's almost a singular example. You know, I couldn't find any other examples of Black cooperatives that have been set up in Manchester that were successful or that were still going today. Couldn't find any. And that's with access to some, you know, cooperators that have been cooperating for over 40 years. I had those conversations, I had those awkward conversations where I said, you know, have you heard of a study that's incorporated people of color within the movement? And the answer was no. And that answer is also reflected in the engagement with the working classes as well, and people that are in need of intervention and support. I think communicating the social impact, again, that Rose alluded to, is essential, because as much as I'm being quite critical here with what I'm saying, there is lots of good work that's happening. Why aren't we shouting about it? Why isn't it on the TV in an advert? You know, we have cooperative schools and academies now. Why aren't we recruiting from them? We've got this direct pool of young people that are keen to have an option, to have you know, somewhere to go or something to do that is different from what they currently have. And in order for us to build that trust and engagement with young people, they need to see what we're doing and think, I want to be a part of that, because I've seen them do something positive there for the community, or I've seen them do something positive for someone I know. I want to be a part of that. We need to lead by example in that sense. I'm a big fan of quotes and short stories, so I will no doubt go over time, Polly, so please just shout at me if I do. But there's a great story about an old kind of community leader / teacher. I'll probably, you know, brutalize this quote, so please correct me in the chat if anyone knows of this. But he gets approached and says, this person says, look, I've got an addiction to sugar. Can you help me? You know, I need to shed this addiction so I can move on with my life, be happier and healthier. So the yogi, the teacher, whatever you want to call them, says, yeah, I can help you. Come back in 3 months. So this person looks slightly confused. They've had to wait for a while. They go away. They come back in 3 months and he says, right, I'm ready to begin helping you and do that. And they say, oh, great, but why did I have to wait for 3 months before I could come back? And he said, well, I had to give up sugar first. And so for me, it's a really powerful story to show that if we do want to lead and we want to change the world for young people, you know, starting with our movement, within the cooperative movement, and then branching out wider, we need them to trust us and we need to show them how to do that. And a lot of that is with the language, and a lot of that is with our approach. You know, when it comes to representation, there aren't enough people of colour. There aren't enough working class people in positions of power. I'm starting to see change now, but it's taken a long time, and it's only just starting to come and starting to happen. So I feel like we're on the cusp of a moment of real opportunity. Crisis, whether it's political, economic, financial, it always presents opportunity, as well as, you know, trauma and horror and all the rest of it. I feel like we need to seize that opportunity now. There's you know, we're right on the cusp of a major global change in the way we work, the way we talk, the way we communicate. And so what better a sector to do that in than this one here? So moving on to my next slide. This is something that I literally pulled up and added to my slide as Rose was talking, because again, she mentioned resilience. And for me, it is much easier to build strong children than it is to repair broken adults. Obviously this says men, I'm going to change it to adults. And so for me, this is why I work with young people. It's why I chose to teach, and I was in mainstream education for 5 years. It's why I've chosen to work with young people, to help them avoid the pitfalls that us as adults have had to suffer. And I think we do have work to repair the broken systems that we currently work within. We do have work to mend and reconnect these broken connections between us all. You know, we've got, what is it, over 70 people on this call. If all of us had a conversation with all of us, it would take us months, but it would be an amazing network of people communicating in a way that I haven't seen for a long time. And I think the movement has the power to do that, whereas a lot of other sectors, a lot of other organizations and businesses, they don't have that power. And again, we're speaking of power and the redistribution of power and wealth is something that's always fascinated me. And as the quote says, historically, power is never given, it is taken. And for me, you know, that rings true in the history I've studied. It rings true in the world that I've lived in and worked in. But for me, again, I pose a question to us all in the session now, is that do we want to have to force our younger generations to wrestle this power away from us, because it will be us within those positions of power, or do we want to give it to them? Do we want to break this cycle and say, well, actually, I'm going to give you the opportunity to take this power. What are you going to do with it? Here's a place that we've created for you. How would you like us to support you? How can we lead you to become the future that you want to see? And I think that the young people that we work with are incredibly powerful. The most resilient people I've ever come across in all my years of, you know, existing are young people, especially young people going through trauma and young people going through crisis. I've seen strength that I have yet to see replicated elsewhere, emanating from these young people desperate to do something else. An example of that would be the Youth Cooperative Action Project that we run at the college. I won't go into the project and what it is. You can go to the college website and check that out. But in a nutshell, it's a youth social action project led by the young people themselves, underpinned by cooperative values with a focus on youth loneliness. And one of the links that I'm going to share in a minute is the last social action event that we held a couple of weeks ago, where the young people held an event to raise awareness for child poverty and food poverty. This was something that was incredibly powerful. They gave a discussion, they talked about statistics, facts, we had an open debate, they interviewed a Rochdale MP during the session, and to see those 5 young women, all young women of colour as well, just through how the cohort came together and who stayed and who made it to the end, to see them speaking truth to power like that, to see them emboldened, inspired, passionate, because their passion had been fed, it had been nurtured, and it had been set free through the project, because that's the only reason that I'm involved with this, because that's what it does. It was amazing to see them question things and change things and say, actually, I want to be involved in the next cohort. Actually, yeah, this has just strengthened my convictions to be a politician. I want to be in that House of Parliament. I want to be in the Rochdale Town Hall in the future. It was beautiful to see. And it's something, again, that's come from inspiring and motivating those young people and giving them the support that they need. And I think that we don't do enough exposing of what we do to young people. That kind of exposure and experience that's going to feed their imagination is something that's so key. And we don't do enough of it. We do, you know, again, I've been quite critical in this talk, but we do loads of things very, very well. And we do certain things that are so niche and so special that they should be shouted about. And they should be shouted about by all of us. You know, if one of us does something amazing, great, we all benefit. If one of us, you know, suffers, then we all suffer. I feel like that's something that's been slightly lost, and that's something that we need to bring back to the cooperative movement. So this quote that I've got on the screen here.
Daniel, we need to wrap up in the next minute or so.
Yeah, of course. So this is by Trevor Noah and his book, Born a Crime. If you've not listened to it, it's brilliant. And it says, we tell young people to follow their dreams, but we can only dream of what we can imagine. And depending on where you're from, your imagination can be quite limited. And for me, again, it's what we do with the project. It's what I do with all the work I do, whether I'm working with adults or young people. It's trying to show them, yes, there's another way that you can work. There's another way that you can live. There's another way that you can collaborate and cooperate in order to achieve what you're trying to achieve, or to maintain, you know, become strong and healthy. So I'll leave you with that quote. I hope I've not rambled too much. I know I haven't completely answered the question, but there's some things there that I feel like needed to be said, and I'm really keen to hear some responses from everybody. So I'm going to stop sharing and just pop a few of those links that I mentioned into the chat.
Amazing. Thank you, Daniel. I can see that there's loads of discussion happening in the chat, which is amazing. I think next time we have like a separate Google Doc as well, because I've seen that working really well. There are lots of questions, some of which are more related to your talk and some of which kind of like off the back of different chats. Does anybody want to put their hand up? I noticed that, for example, Florence, you've had put quite a lot in there. Would you like to ask a question?
No, they're not questions, more comments. So
okay, in which case I'm going to just choose this one, which I just saw. Whoops, sorry, where's it gone? Dill, do you want to ask? Would you like to ask your question? Okay, I'm going to read it out for Dill. Dill's question is: if the model rules for a simple co-op run to 21 pages of legalese, why would a young co-op group, a young group who just want to collaborate, bother to look at a co-op model rather than make a social agreement among themselves? Let's give them 3 reasons.
Yeah, it's a good question and it's a good point, and it links to what I was saying about language and communication and barriers. Is that certain things that should be a way in, a way of access or a pathway have actually become a bit more of a barrier and a disincentive to young people. Like you say, I don't want to read through 21 pages of small print, no one does. But at the end of the day, there's ways to explain that and talk about that and introduce what a co-op is without that. You can say, unfortunately, yes, of course, as with any business, there's paperwork for us to do. But I think there's certain changes in how we promote and how we talk to what we do and how we change that for young people. The main answer to that for me is relevance. Is that I would say to a young person, well, there's actually another option for you here in a cooperative sense. How relevant is it to you? Do you consider it relevant? Let me show you the relevance. Let me show you why it's going to be beneficial for you to invest that time and energy to get through that paperwork, to have these discussions with me or whoever it is, and to address that issue. But yeah, very good point. Very good point.
Fantastic. Thank you, Daniel. Just because of time, I'm going to move on to our next speaker, who's Sean. A couple of people who've been doing something which is really handy in the chat. If you wouldn't mind prefacing your text with like a question for Daniel, for example, or a question for Sean, that will just help me a little bit. I'll just know which ones are more sort of specific questions versus kind of comments. So that would be really handy for me. Thank you. So Sean, I'm going to hand over to you. Sean is.
Thank you, Polly. Thank you so much for inviting me. All right. Hello, everybody. Yeah, I'm Sean Wellens. I've been worker cooperating for quite a long time and working with new and developed worker co-ops over the last 10 years. And over the last year, I've been thinking a lot about this question of what's the political relevance of worker cooperation more widely and worker cooperatives in particular in a crisis situation. And I asked myself, well, are we actually in a social and political crisis? Because we've talked about how individual people and groups of people are having an extremely tough time at the moment. And some of them are in crisis, personal crisis. But I read it as a time of social and political crisis is when actually not only things are getting really difficult, but actually there's actually a contestation of business as usual or politics as usual that results in a sharp change or the possibility for a sharp change or a sharp change of direction. And that comes out of people coming together to actually organise to respond to the conditions that they're being put under in a really deep way. And that's the way I read this. So my approach to this is a little bit highfalutin, perhaps, please forgive me, but I've got so much to say and so little time to say it, and that's always my problem. I mean, we are in a situation of crisis. We're in a situation of economic and social crisis, and most significantly environmental crisis. That means that for life to be bearable for billions of people, we're going to have to make enormous changes to our social and economic order in the next 10 years. We are going to have to massively and rapidly reduce the impact of enterprises, businesses, which are responsible for 70% of emissions and pollution and almost all of the extraction of natural resources that can't be replaced. And this is one aspect of the huge issue. Now, people talk about COVID as a crisis, and certainly COVID has produced a situation in which a kind of contested crisis could occur and actually is occurring. There's huge social unrest going on all over the world, social and political movements in all the continents taking different aspects. But COVID really, in my view, is a placeholder for any kind of catastrophic event actually engineered by capitalist social relations themselves. And another example would be wars. One thing that I think that this COVID crisis revealed was something about what actually is essential in terms of how we produce and reproduce this world and stay alive and stay well. And I think what it revealed that, in April, May, June last year in our country and in many countries, that actually what's essential is food production and distribution, transport, healthcare and social care, some essential manufacturing, and of course art. but overlaying that question of what is important for us to be able to produce, to survive well, is what are actually the essential jobs. What are the essential products and services, but what are the actual essential jobs? And I sometimes look at David Graeber's analysis of a lot of what he calls socially useless work, which he summarizes in 5 ways. I think it was flunkies, goons, duct tapers, taskmasters, and something else. But he basically analysed that in the rich countries, 50% of work is entirely useless, and that's before he went into. Now, so I think that where the cooperative movement could be really effective, is in really doing some deep work on this question of what is essential, ethical, necessary production. How do we do it? How do we do it in a way that isn't wasteful? How do we do it in a way that massively reduces the impact on our planet? And I would propose a sort of transitional demand is that everybody who can works, and everyone works 15 hours a week, and that would enable us to free up if we stop doing useless and harmful work, that would enable us to create the space to actually make the deep social and political changes that we probably need to make in the next 10 years. Why co-ops, I think, are potentially relevant to this is that actually cooperatives already have a body of practice around identifying what actually is socially useful and ethical production and services, because that's what co-ops do. And I come very much from the side of worker co-ops. I am concerned with this question of production and reproduction. And worker co-ops do this all the time. They go into areas of what they consider to be useful and ethical production. That's what they try to do on the whole, the best of them. Co-ops also have a body of practice around identifying and mitigating socially meaningless jobs. One of the things that worker co-ops are very good at is analysing and the management process, because in a lot of companies and a lot of enterprises, a vast amount of resource and personnel goes into essentially maintaining discipline in the enterprise. That's what essentially management is. Management, line management of people, and worker co-ops are really good at actually removing it, and that's part of their advantage actually commercially. And I think that worker co-ops, again, the best of them actually have a practice that goes beyond merely trying to create a decent work-life balance for their members and for workers, but to actually considering the human needs of their worker members outside of the workplace in quite a deep way. And quite a lot of worker co-ops, apart from, actually look at really carefully balancing the needs of workers, their families, the communities, so that people can actually thrive while being able to work effectively. And worker co-ops, I think worker co-ops probably do, have more practice, a greater body of practice around that than almost any other type of enterprise. Worker co-ops also are very good at, the posh word would be valorising reproductive labour, but actually placing value on the work that goes on that's unpaid, to keep us all going. Work in households, the work of childcare, the work of cooking and cleaning, and worker co-ops have an attitude to this stuff. And worker co-ops also have a body of practice around identifying both the more obvious and the more subtle manifestations of inequality. And I think this is something we really have to get serious about, and actually mitigating these effects of privilege and inequality. And the other thing that cooperatives are about is connecting productively and accountably, and being accountable to the communities in which they trade and operate. And when you see whole countries and regions in crisis, Argentina in the early 2000s or Greece in 2012, you'll see that this kind of instinct of cooperation out of necessity, breaks out of the workplace and becomes communal. It becomes a general social effort to connect communities, workplaces, productive capacity, people's ability to work, to actually maximize people's chances. And this is what I think co-ops do just at an ordinary day-to-day level when we're not in a situation of crisis. This is what they do ordinarily. So I think that when you talk about a situation which you've identified, Rose and Daniel have identified, that there really is a sharp crisis coming, and it's spilling out all over the place. I think that the cooperative movement has the capacity to raise just that level of practice that it does at its best all the time, to a more general level of inquiry into why this world is as it is, why we are divided, why we are exploited, and they can extend this analysis and this mode of inquiry beyond the workplace and the region, and actually start to consider the same question at a global level. Why is global production divided in the way it is? Why is it that Europe and North America are centers of technical and research development, financial and professional services? How is it that Asia is now the factory of the world? That Africa is the place of extraction of raw materials and agricultural outsourcing, and Latin America is kind of a reserve army of labor for the other regions, for North America and so forth, and that we understand that actually the economy, the social economy that we live in, is actually massively cooperative and fragile. Chains of cooperation happen at the local level, at the level of the factory, but they happen at a global level. Is that workers and people cooperate massively to make this whole machine keep going, but it's not a machine that's good for us. And at a sort of theoretical level, I think that at their best, that's where cooperatives, and particularly worker cooperatives, are going to be very important, because in a transition to a just economy or a just society, a stepping stone is going to be workers' control of production and reorganization of production. This is going to have to happen, and it isn't going to happen because Shell wants it to happen or Goldman Sachs wants it to happen. It's going to happen because we want it to happen and we make it happen. So that's where the question of power comes up so clearly. Polly, I don't know how many minutes I've got left, if any.
Well, you've spoken for 10 minutes. But
okay. Well, I've got a little. Can I finish with a quote? Because I got a couple of quotes. I think a worker cooperator called Simon Ball sent me a think piece this afternoon, which really connects to me this kind of micro and macro level of why cooperation is relevant. And he said, when you look at the events that shaped your life, a few significant key moments are recalled with incredible clarity, life-changing moments. For me, one of those was discovering worker cooperatives and reading about the cooperative values and principles. And he then talks about how that happened at a time of personal crisis for him. And he says it's not a unique story, and it's a shared experience of many founding members of the recent wave of co-op startups. Let's go and radically improve our collective condition through self-help, mutual aid and co-op principles. He says that we can't tinker around the edges and semantics of what the principle stands for. What we need to do is to flip the discussion on its head and think how we can better communicate the relevance and potency of cooperative principles. We need to position ourselves at the leading edge of technological development and leverage a position of influence so that the coming wave of new internet protocols are managed in a decentralized and cooperative way. He kind of talks really, really well about it, but he finishes by saying we may not have planned to get involved in building the future of the world, but it's happening below our feet in most instances. And if we don't galvanize the global cooperative movement to raise enough awareness so that forming and joining and working cooperatively becomes irresistible, then we'll remain forever stuck in recursive discussions about the state of our movement. A movement moves, it stirs, it carries, it flows, it leads. A movement grows and a movement acts. So when we stare into the future, we can write the history, inspire our communities and change our world. And all this stems from 7 humble principles. And that's a young cooperator talking about their personal experience, but also linking it to the generality. And I think I just wanted to finish by saying, we have to be massively ambitious as the Rochdale pioneers were, because when the Rochdale pioneers wrote their, sorry about that, I live in London. They're sick. They said we're going to open a shop and we're going to do housing and we're going to do agriculture. And they said, and as soon as practicable, we shall proceed to arrange the powers of production, distribution, education, and government, or in other words, to establish a self-supporting home colony of united interests, or assist others in establishing such colonies. So that's a vision of the cooperative commonwealth, and it's all encompassing. And I think that's something we shouldn't lose sight of. And it's old-fashioned language, but you could really rewrite that for now. And I think that's really interesting. So, Check, thank you very much. Sorry for running over a bit.
That's fantastic. Thank you, Sean. We've got a question from Christopher Hall. Would you like to ask your question?
Hi, okay then. Sean, to what extent do you think, or do you want or expect us and co-ops to sort of rise up and break the law in order to change the world in which we currently live? In other words, sort of how do we bring about this transformation? Because we might agree with you and we might all share the sentiment, but how you get from A to B is going to be, well, it's a massive question, isn't it? So over to you.
Okay, well, I mean, I think the short answer is that what we shouldn't be doing is going out and telling people that cooperatives are wonderful and you should start cooperatives because they create more stable employment and people are happier and they're more productive and they're very good at raising the rate of profit. I think our task is to make the cooperative technology or the cooperative system available to people who are already fighting for their lives and fighting to change things. That's the problem, and that's happening all around us. There are people struggling over their housing, over their food, over their environment, who don't have these tools that we have, and what we have is a toolkit. So I think that we don't go out and preach it. We make what we know available, and that's quite, we have to be humble in that, but we have to connect with the social movement. Second, the actual existing cooperative movement is nowhere near big enough, strong enough, or good enough to actually carry out this revolution ourselves. The question of when it comes up against the law, I mean, to me, the law is the system that's in place, or one of the systems that's in place to maintain business as usual. And actually, that earlier question about people having to incorporate to create a corporate body, which is a legal person that isn't a real person, but it creates a legal shell for people to be able to transact, is profoundly uncooperative. I mean, a cooperative is a group of people coming together to meet their needs and aspirations. There's nothing in the definition that says anything about forming a company or a society or anything like that. So, that is quite an interesting one. And the reasons why people use corporate forms in the law is because basically it's incredibly difficult in this world to do anything together without being picked off. So there is a deep issue there, and I think I mean I'll check at that, because that's a really big question. But I think that there's no doubt that a radical cooperative movement will come up against the law, and there are many countries in which cooperatives have been illegal or are illegal because they're seen as basically not compatible with business as usual. So yeah.
Thank you, Sean. That's an exciting note to leave it on. Right, I'm going to introduce our last speaker, who is John from Co-operative. And while he does that, I'm going to launch a poll. So as some of you may know, we get access to a building for free where we generally do our stuff when it's not COVID, and we do training to try and support more co-ops and other kind of radical tech organizations. And we get that for free from Islington. And in exchange, we have to prove that we're creating some kind of social value. So I'm going to launch a poll. It is by no means obligatory, but it would of course help us if you would fill it up. So it should just take you like 30 seconds while you're listening to John. So over to you, John. Thank you very much.
Cool, thank you very much. All right, I'm gonna share my screen, get my thing on. Yeah, first apologies, Sean, you said don't just talk about how great it is in a co-op. I'm going to do that for the next 10 minutes. Cool. All right, so my focus is on like the individual joining a co-op in a time of political and economic crisis. And the first thing is in terms of like what a crisis is, mainly just something that changes the way you thought about the world. Those sort of shocks the way you made sense of what was going on. And obviously, yeah, you ask these questions like, what are the new rules? How are we supposed to keep going? Your sort of projections of the future that you've spent ages working on don't sort of make sense anymore, and it becomes like massively uncertain. So the current pandemic is the best example, but there's been Brexit, financial crash 10 years ago, all that sort of stuff. For us in Co-operative, so we're about 10 members. We work on apps and websites as a workers' co-op. And the pandemic hit us. We basically lost the social side of our co-op. Like we couldn't do our like monthly socials in person, and increasing the sort of general stress level to a point where no one actually wanted to do a quiz over Zoom or whatever, even if that would have been a good idea. That just didn't want to do it. Okay, so but why would you want to be in it? So the reason you want to be in a worker co-op is our favorite statistic there. It's better to work for an organization that still exists during a crisis. And there's the stat that Rose had, 76% versus 45%. But as well as that, they're less likely to be, co-ops are less likely to take on debt and be over leveraged. And co-ops are in general sort of more creative and flexible than other kinds of enterprises, because all of the members are contributing to its survival. The people working there want it to continue, like positively, more than just losing their livelihoods. They helped create it, basically. So for us, we've managed to, still remain here. Most of our projects have been under this sort of weird system. We managed to grow by 1 member and won our first bid in the bidding process and passed the threshold for paying VAT. And this because people, didn't take the current situation for granted. They sort of like decided, right, I'm going to put the work in to help out my fellow members to make this kind of work. Cool. So this is the other thing, is that you aren't just cut loose at the sort of first sign of trouble. So a lot of normal enterprises, when they get into trouble or a crisis, they start cutting and losing people. And if there's in a co-op, if there's strain, you can move things around rather than punishing the people at the bottom. And this is something that I think Sean mentioned with his reference to David Graeber about the sort of useless jobs thing. In general, co-ops, people know what each other's like do, what their capabilities are. They are usually essential to the co-op functioning. I think that there's less room to hide in a co-op if you're not actively contributing. And that means that when a crisis comes, everyone knows that you're recognizing each other's value, and it's sort of obviously not a good idea to just cut people loose. The other thing is that in a co-op, there's an atmosphere of sort of open discussion. So you can discuss your options rather than having to sort of have whispers around the water cooler or something like that. It's required, you have to talk to each other about problems because you've already been doing it. And rather than have this sort of situation where managers assure everyone that everything's going to be fine, go back to work, don't do anything. Like you have an atmosphere of recognizing that there is a problem, and you do need to do something about it, and you can like talk actively, about it. You can ask other people what options do you have for me, and in our co-op, we've not had we haven't had a massive amount of problems of having to move people around or retrain, but in that instance, we have allowed people have been able to find the resources that they need for that. This other part is like co-ops don't exist in a vacuum. So rather than having a very competitive sort of dog-eat-dog reaction to other organizations, they generally create sort of networks of solidarity around it. So in our case, that's CoTech, which has been extremely helpful for any of our social problems. Like when people aren't getting along, we can invite in, we can ask for advice, or we can invite in like people from other co-ops who've experienced things before, talk through the problem, see if there's like a creative solution or something from the past people can actually like bring in. And then there's also the potential members as well. So like the bidding process that I mentioned earlier, there was we were still like greeting people like online, and it was one of our new members who did a lot of the work to like actually bring that bid in. So by being open to other people helping, we actually managed to generate like quite a lot of work for everyone in the co-op. Cool. So yeah, this is back to the crisis thing. I think that if you join the worker co-op in the state of the economy maybe last year or 5 years ago, whatever, in some ways there was already a crisis going on that you were like reacting to. So in our co-op, it was the transition to the gig economy, and contractors and freelancers not being treated very well and not really getting a fair share of the value that they were generating. So for us, it was the agencies in Newcastle were generally taking about 20% of the labor from both sides, basically. So like you would lose about 40% of the money that you earned, and the client, well, you would lose 20%, the client would pay 20% more, just because a person with a spreadsheet was able to insert himself or herself in the middle of that transaction. So we were already responding to that, and that means that we were already creating this sort of culture of transparency around with our clients, and that there was very low amounts of like waste in the co-op. So we already knew how to do things sort of relatively cheaply and efficiently, and working remotely was like a challenge, but it's not been as big a challenge as it's not been a bigger challenge than like starting up basically and trying to work out how does this all work. I also think that to go back to the community part of it, the people in CoTech are actively trying to like set us up for success. So before the pandemic began, or at least before it had impacted the UK much, people were sharing like articles about like what is the likely impact going to be, and urging people to like start working from home all the time before it became like a government mandated thing. So there's being part of this network means that you're sort of already like ahead of the curve and you're able to react to things a little bit before they start to impact you. Yeah, and this is the other part of being in a co-op during a crisis, is that if you are resilient, it means you're still around, right, when things start to get better. So you get to be part of to build like what comes next. You learn a ton of things. I think what we've learned is something that I already suspected, which is that we can't neglect the social side and the fun side, because people start to hate each other or start to view each other as as someone who always blocks my ideas rather than like a human being who enjoys lots of different things and not just disagreeing with people. Taking advantage of the opportunities that arise. So like when we emerge from crisis, everyone who survives is like you get a chance to make something together, and you get to sort of emerge and see what the landscape is like. So for us, there's Cafe Co-op that's currently doing crowdfunding right now, that is going to sort of build a co-op hub in Gateshead where we work, and that should, and if you create that as a sort of like a co-working space or a co-op hub, it makes us even more resilient than last time. If we build up like deepening, thickening, widening the network as we go on, it just makes it a lot easier to survive, right? So we sort of have that positive feedback loop of increasing resilience and then surviving the crisis and then keep on like sort of growing the sector. So and before that, ideally, the reward is that you get to have some good times, right? So we're not always in crisis, or as Sean says, we're probably not in crisis yet. After the crisis, you get to have like an actually good time, and enjoying the benefits of a co-op rather that are like, you know, all the money you can spend it on yourselves, you can spend it on the community, and you can spend it on other co-ops, and it's just, you know, it is actually a lot of fun. Cool. I think that, and these are my plugs and information. Feel free to email any of these things. I think I'm ready for questions. Polly. Sorry if I haven't used enough of my time.
No, you were perfect. I've been very bad at comparing, so that's fantastic. Thank you so much, John. And yeah, big up to Tampopo who are opening another space. So we're going to have a big old network of physical spaces to bring co-ops together. So yeah, thanks. That was John from Co-operative. Right, is there anybody who would like to ask questions specifically to John? Otherwise, I might scroll back through. Anybody want to put their hands up? And in fact, John, if you wouldn't mind stopping sharing your screen, so that I can see everybody. Right, anybody want to put their hand up? Finally?
Crystal has got his hand up.
Oh, who does?
Christopher Hall. He has his physical hand up in real life.
Oh, I'm sorry, I can't see.
Sorry.
Sorry, go ahead, whoever's got the hand up.
Right, whoever is Chris Hall. A quick question for Rose, which was, Rose, because you're new to Co-ops UK, I think the one thing that may have come out of the pandemic is the fact that suddenly, I know we could say we're all zoomed out, but I think there are quite a lot of people who'd say, whereas we couldn't all gather by train, car and bus or whatever for a co-op meeting, we can gather by Zoom. So I think there's room for Zoom meetings like this. So I'll ask you, will you carry that forward? For Daniel, who has at the Co-op College, Daniel, we're still interested in a cooperative university. So wondering about that as a flagship way forward. And for John, because I've had my try at Sean Wellens about how we get get this transformation. What I would say is a slightly different angle. I just note that people like Sean, I would almost, in chess terms, Sean might be a grandmaster who'd understand so much about cooperation. But there are people like me who are not grandmasters but support co-ops, and then there's the rest of the people, and they don't really take much interest. So how are we going to get that transformation amongst the people? And I know Sean's given us one kind of an answer. I was trying to check on the legal basis, but then the final point about that is for John, the transformation. How do we develop the groundswell? Because the co-op is so organic. It's got the right number of people in the co-op, so unless it'll grow by one or two, I'm not quite sure how we get the groundswell in a slightly different way. So sorry about that, Polly. There's a few questions, and I'll leave it to you.
3 questions. John, can you answer first, if you wouldn't mind?
Yeah, sure. So I think that I think the answer is the traditional way that's been done in the past is to link up co-ops, unions, and political parties, right? So it's that you can't have the co-op movement doesn't grow like in isolation from the union movement and from a particular political party that might grow it. And obviously, unions and political parties don't work the same as co-ops, but they are. That is how traditionally like it would work. Like you pass people from one situation that's working to another one, and like ideally they can sort of fill in the gaps and provide the resources or provide the ideas and sort of ideological framework that works for them. So I think it's just I suppose if you're thinking logistically, it'd be like trying to. And it's very difficult to get a full picture. It's quite complex. But if you were looking for like low-hanging fruit and like saying as a movement of co-op unions and political parties, like what sectors or what issues are like the easiest ones that we can focus our attention on, get wins from, and then that transfer things across. So I don't know if it's the like the delivery gig, like the gig economy, like Deliveroo and Uber Eats and stuff like that. I don't know if the political party thing is a tricky one with the actual ally of unions and stuff. The Labour Party sort of going back to like more centrists and things like that. So I don't know. If it was easy, it would have been done by now, I suppose. But I think that's my answer, is like highly joined up, highly sort of alliances and joining up with people, and seeing where the energy is and where things should be focused.
Thank you, John. Right, I'm aware we're already a few minutes over. Just because I know probably people have got dinners to eat and things, I just wanted to say before everybody starts signing out, thank you so much for coming. Stay in touch. Maddie's put a link to our newsletter in the chat, and you can obviously find it on our website. And you can, get in touch with us if you want to discuss any of these issues more, or indeed if you'd like to ever come and speak at one of our events. To our speakers as well, I know that I've only asked you to be here till 15:15, so if you need to leave, that's absolutely understandable. I'm going to be around for another 10 minutes, so Rose or Daniel, would you be able to pick up either of the other questions if you can stay for another couple of minutes?
Yeah, I can happily answer my one. It was an easy one. Yes, Chris. What co-op do you belong to, Chris?
Well, I belong to a variety of co-ops, but I'm, the generalised version is the co-op group, mid-counties, co-op energy, quite a number. And then Wales, Co-ops and Mutuals, Wales. So there's all sorts of co-ops, but my main job is in the magistrates' courts.
So the reason I asked that, because it's something that we're looking to understand more, like around if someone's a member of a co-op, are they a member of many co-ops and all that type of stuff. So three things. One, yes, there are co-op connections events, and clearly we're not being visible enough on that, so that's something we'll look at. Two, I do surgeries every last Wednesday of the month where people like yourself who want to talk about how we can do this better, please book in. You can do that through the Co-op UK website and we'll work out a plan. And the third thing is something that will be semi-online, I should imagine, because of where we're at with lockdown. On the 25th of June, it's the Co-operative UK Congress, and Congress, is that big event where, historically these matters, some of the stuff that Daniel and Sean and Joe have been talking about, really we get under the skin of, and it's my ambition that this Congress, we bring back some hustings and we kind of bring a new network and freshness to kind of what the movement can achieve. So I just ask you all to come along to Congress on the 25th of June, if online, and that's the start of answering you. Yes, Chris, like absolutely we should make all our events available online so that everybody can join in. So absolutely.
Chris, I see that Daniel has kindly answered your question in the chat, but Daniel, would you like to add anything else?
Yeah, just to reiterate what's in the chat really, is that unfortunately due to COVID, the Co-op Uni is on hold for the time being. We'd love it to continue. Obviously, we were all gutted, Scilla especially, and obviously anyone that's worked with Scilla and the rest of the team knows how passionately we were pursuing that. Still a firm aspiration, but if we want it to be a reality, it will have to be a cooperative effort, pun intended. I hope that answers the question, but yeah, that's all I can say on it really.
Thanks, and we'll just finish up then by taking a question from Ian.
Caught me unawares there. I thought you were going to leave me out, but I'm reading a book currently by a bloke called David Edgerton, The Rise and the Fall of the British Nation, which includes an awful lot of stuff that I didn't know at all. It's fascinating. But one of the things is about a crisis that happened a few years ago, perhaps it parallels the one we have. And after the First World War, the British nation had a huge debt. And a lot of it was owed to people with lots of money. Now, afterwards, they decided to keep up the interest payments on the money they were owed and allowed the majority of people to live in squalor. And as a result of that, in 1926, there was a general strike where the unions said, we've had enough. The working people are being screwed. They fought the war and now they're being screwed. Now, behind me is a picture by a bloke called Walter Crane, who was an artist who, on the eve of the general strike, released his picture of a cooperative commonwealth. How about that? As an alternative to the strife imposed by the government. Why not imagine at the middle of a huge industrial action, why not imagine an alternative? And Professor Chomsky made this very clear yesterday, that we need to think big, but we need to challenge the people that are prepared to pay down debt rather than allow people to live. And I'm afraid that's more of a fight than anything else, as Chris has mentioned. So yeah, Walter Crane, a cooperative commonwealth. Can we do it again? Or have we lost our imagination?
Okay, just very briefly then, before we round up the evening, would anybody like to just have a few words to answer? Rose, Daniel, Sean?
I have a question. So I'm in the States right now, but a lot of things that you guys are saying like seem to be more like transcend just our general human family, in the sense of like how co-ops don't seem to be as popular. And in the States right now, there's even talk of how like trade unions and all that, or the idea of going to trade school and taking trade jobs, or even it's not even talked about because people just don't value them. There's no real advertisement for them. So it's like the youth here don't really have a reason to really engage in those types of things. And it's even similar with co-ops, where like I got into it like in the past 2 years. I was even telling my brothers about it, and then like, oh, one of them wants to go into music, and I was telling them like, oh yeah, you know, you can like set it up as a co-op with other musicians and all that kind of stuff and figure out some type of way with that. And the general like sense of it was like, oh, like I've heard about those things, but they don't seem to work type of thing. So it's like, and I feel as if there's just a perception. Someone in the chat was saying there's a perception of co-ops, of these type of, you know, mutual aid, collective types of business models. And I was just wanting to ask anyone, if anyone can answer, it's like, how do we then change the perception from a school aspect? Because I feel that cooperatives, these unions and all that kind of stuff, they're always, they don't get advertised the best way, because I feel co-ops in general, co-op organizations aren't being as aggressive in how we integrate into our normal lives. Because either some people don't know about them, or they've heard about them from in a light where it's like they're not as important, or they just might not work. So how do we get it into our normal lives such that when we come of age around like 16, 15, whatever, where we start working, we have in our minds like, oh, maybe I want to go work for a co-op instead of working for this whatever corporation, or this corporate job or something like that. Like how do we start normalizing the idea of co-op such that it's not a question of, oh, now we have to get people to even know what we are, but like the idea of co-ops has been around for a very, very long time. So it's not even something that's new. It's more of just like, I feel like there's something there's a shielding in terms of the cultures that we're all growing up in. Most of us just aren't aware of them. And when we are aware of them, a lot of people are hearing them in a bad light. So I just wanted to ask, like, how do we start integrate them into schools and stuff like that?
I wanted to just come back on that really quickly. I know you want to answer that, Sean, and you can probably answer it in a lot more detail than I can. First of all, thank you for joining us from the States. I don't know what time it is over there, but thank you. Thanks for your question. I think it links back to what I was talking to earlier before about relevancy and speaking to the young people themselves, like you say, to attract those young people, to show them that there's worth in the co-op movement. We have to show them, and we have to talk to them. We have to speak in their language, and we have to connect. We have to develop that trust. And I think we've got lots of different inroads into youth and schools and young people, but like you say, that aggressive integration that you mentioned, it hasn't happened yet on the scale that it would need to. But I think a lot of that is about us first changing how we work, how we talk to people, how we reach out, and making that more effective. But then just actively doing it. I think, you know, there's a lot of limitation that comes in the movement through talk. Is that, you know, there's too much talk often on certain issues and certain things, and it slows that action that young people see, because, you know, I lose interest. So if I lose interest, the young people are going to lose interest, you know. But I think it's a really important question, and I'm glad you asked it. I hope I've given you some semblance of an answer.
Thank you.
Can I ask a question?
You know, Sean was going to answer that one. I'm really sorry, but it is very near to 7:30, and we said we'd be finally wrapped up by then. Please do email me over, and I'll try and introduce you to the right people to answer your questions. But I'm sorry, nobody will ever come and speak at one of our events again if we keep them here all night. But thank you so much for offering, Becky. But Sean, would you like to just answer that last question?
Yeah, thanks, Polly. Yeah, I mean, I think this is a really good question because it comes back to all these questions about relevance and communication. And to me, the you know, if you wanted the people who do big and large scale cooperative experiments in ownership and control are the younger generations, and they're the younger generations who have had enough of how things are. And I think that, you know, if the cooperative movement projects itself as a slightly better form of business where your job is likely to be slightly nicer and we're slightly more ethical, you're not going to reach people who are passionately want to change their situation and they want to change the way the world is. And that's difficult. The difficulty with propagandizing cooperation is that it's actually at its heart, it's not business as usual, and we don't have the same language. There are lots of problems over language precisely because we're, you know, what we do and what we aim for at the highest level is completely antithetical to the system we live under now. And that's very difficult to talk about when people are not already in situations of struggle and trying to change things. So I think that the strategy of the US Federation of Worker Cooperatives is very interesting because they are really explicitly aligning themselves with the social justice movements, absolutely explicitly. And they're talking, you know, if you look at how they project themselves and where they make their alliances, they don't go out saying cooperatives are a better way to do business. They go, cooperatives are a way to change, to address social justice issues and to make political change. And that's what I think if you, that's the kind of message, and we have to put out to reach the people who are likely to get it and to be able to use what we've got, you know, because that's what it comes down to. Anyway, sorry, thanks for that. Check.
Thank you.
Right, I'm really sorry to everyone else who wanted to ask a question, but thank you all so much for coming this evening. And yeah, please do stay in touch. Please send up to our email. Please engage with us on Twitter. And if you've got questions, ask them on Twitter and we can retweet them and things and hopefully get like a bigger range of answers. So yeah, that was it. Thank you all so much for coming. And yeah, I hope you stay in touch. And I hope you all start cooperating in whatever ways that you can and kind of spreading the words. And yeah, like Sean says, it's not just about creating these structures, but it's about kind of creating genuine change.
Thank you.
Thank you all very much.
Thanks, everyone.
Bye-bye.
Thank you, everybody. Thanks for coming.
Thank you. Bye.
Thanks for the questions.
Yeah, thank you so much for the questions.
I'm just hanging about to see who ends up here at the end. Why not?
Me too. see Polly's gone.
Polly's
Yeah, Polly's
gone.
off. Polly's all right. That's it.
Shit, Polly's like, done. I'm leaving. See ya. I'm gonna if I hang up, then it will stop the whole thing. So I'm gonna do that. Everyone
Dan,
okay?
your email in the chat, Daniel, would it be possible to, or what's the best way?
Oh, Polly is still here. Great.
Oh, sorry, yeah, I accidentally left.
We thought you were like, see ya.
Oh, thanks, Daniel.
I popped it in the chat for you. I popped it in a couple of times, but I popped it in
Oh,
again.
sorry. Thanks, it's hard to follow it. Thanks so much. That's great.
Okay.
I know the chat was crazy.
Sorry not to get to you.
Bye. No worries. Cheers.
Thanks, Sean. Thanks, Daniel. That's great.
Oh, you're welcome.
All right.
Pleasure to be a part of it.
I haven't really hosted, like I've spoken at a couple of online events, but I haven't actually hosted any. They're quite.
What did you find?
They're a bit good. Yeah, I think it's a bit tricky because I think I'd sort of hosted enough face-to-face ones that you get a bit of a feel for the room and like, you know, to try and spread out the questions. So for example, there were some people posting questions which were like, say, for example, like directed at you, Daniel, but by that point we'd already kind of moved on to the next speaker. And it's a bit distracting because there's also like questions popping up in my chat and I'm like, oh, but I guess you just get the hang of it, don't you, like anything, right?
Yeah, definitely.
It's nice that so many people came. I think Maddie and I had both thought, like, you know, there was so many, you know, there was that big Angela Davis talk, like at the beginning of lockdown. It's like, wow, how can we compete with all these amazing people doing talks? But there is obviously like a hell of a lot of people interested in new questions and wanting to connect. So
I think you had 65 people at the top, was it? Something like that?
Something like that.
Yeah, we had 75 actually.
75. I mean, that's not bad for a CoTech forum with, you know.
Pretty damn good. And you know what, it also brings up this question of like, once we are allowed back physically, we need to be able to work out like a good way that it can, that we can have it both virtual and physical, because of course, like, it's really nice to build up those kind of relationships physically, but at the same time, like, being able to broaden it out to anybody all over the world is amazing, right?
Yeah. I mean, that's what we're thinking about Work Art Weekend, because we're going to have an internationalist theme, but I think Work Art Weekend is probably going to be the first, you know, it's the first major physical gathering on my timeline that I think is definitely going to happen.
Yeah.
But we're probably going to have it, you know, do a kind of a pre-event online, because we really want to make it have a really strong international theme anyway. So it's just working out how to do that effectively. But yeah, I mean, we had an amazing virtual Work Art Weekend last May with like 45 people getting drunk for 5 hours, and we had a bonfire and a quiz, and you know, it was absolutely amazing. Yeah, we had a virtual bonfire.
Oh, I see, virtual bonfire.
It's a sort of, I think the bonfire was hosting it. You know, the bonfire was the co-host. It was a kind of, but yeah, I mean, it's true. You know, this you know, Zoom fatigue and all that. But boy, can you make some connections that would be really difficult.
And some people got the opposite of Zoom fatigue, right?
Some people like it, really.
Some people are like really Zoom happy.
They've obviously not had like 6 meetings in a day before, have they?
Like,
I'm gonna have to love you and leave you because I've got to go and get some food. I'm
so fun. Thanks so much for your time, Daniel.
Yeah, I'm going to take off as well.
Get in touch.
Thanks for letting me gas on. I always enjoy it.
Oh no, you're amazing. It's all amazing. Thank you so much, Sean. Come from here, you can, and Daniel.
Yeah.
Okay.
When do the pubs open? Surely it must be soon.
Oh.
Well, if it's about work, I can bring some beers up to Space 4. We need to have a work meeting that we couldn't possibly do on Zoom.
Really important work meeting. Make
Let's
sure
do
I
it.
get you plenty of notice.
Well, next time you're down in London, Daniel, come for a work meeting.
All right, take care.
Yeah, good to see you, Daniel. Bye-bye.
Bye. But yeah, Sean, seriously, I'm here most days. So if you want, and like, we've got into the habit of having little work meetings on Fridays.
Okay.
After work meetings. So
is that usually about 6 or something, or?
Yeah.
Okay. You're on. I'm not. Yeah. Okay. Not this Friday, not next Friday, but soon.
What about the one after? Sounds good. All right.
Thanks, everyone. Thanks, Maddie.
Everybody.
Take care. See you.
Bye.
Bye-bye.
Bye, everyone.
I'm gonna go as well.
Yeah, are you gonna hang up? Because then it will stop recording as well.
Well, I thought that was what was going to happen before, actually.
Oh, really? So maybe it's me because
you're the lead host.
Yes, I'm gonna end it all now. Everyone, so we can hear me.
Thank you, everybody. Goodbye.
Bye. Bye.